Pues muy buenos días a todas y a todos y muchísimas gracias por estar aquí y compartir con nosotros este evento tan interesante que se circunscribe dentro de la celebración del 50 aniversario de la Universitat Politécnica de Valencia y que dentro de sus actos pues tenemos la suerte de que algunos de ellos se realicen en nuestro campus y este es uno de ellos, donde vamos a tener la oportunidad de conocer en primera persona a Jean-Pierre Sauvage, que es Premio Nobel de Química, año 2016, profesor de la Universidad de Estrasburgo y que además mañana recibe el doctor honoris causa por la Universitat Politécnica de Valencia. Yo querría primero agradecer a Jean-Pierre por tener la oportunidad de conocerle y de estar aquí con nosotros. Ha estado visitando la universidad, ha atendido a la prensa muy amablemente y ahora vais a tener la oportunidad de oírlo. Y también, como no, de a Chelo Jiménez, vicerrectora, agradecerle muy mucho el hecho de que haya contado con nosotros para acercar al profesor Sauvage aquí a Alcoy y poder disfrutarlo. Como siempre digo, la Politécnica da la oportunidad a la ciudad de Alcoy de tener hechos que son muy singulares, como la oportunidad de tener grandes ponentes y en ocasiones tan especiales como esta, de tener un premio Nobel. Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre, for your assistance here today. Please be very welcome to the city of Alcoy and to the campus of Alcoy of University Politécnica University of Valencia. Y ahora voy a dar la palabra a nuestro alcalde, Toni Francés, y posteriormente subirá Chelo Jiménez, vicerrectora, y en poquito ya tendréis a Jean-Pierre Sauvage con vosotros. Por favor, Toni, si eres tan amable.
Buenos días a todas y a todos. Muy brevemente, porque aquí lo importante es tener la oportunidad de escuchar a Jean-Pierre, pero sí que esta ocasión que nos brinda la universidad no podía dejarla pasar sin agradecer a la universidad, primero todo lo que hace por nuestra ciudad, ¿no? Puede tener el campus de Alcoy de la UPV, nos sitúa en el mapa, nos proyecta y potencia esa ciudad del conocimiento en la que tanto trabajamos y con éxito gracias a ese aliado imprescindible que tenemos, que es la Universidad Politécnica de Valencia. Y en ocasiones, además de todo ese trabajo diario importantísimo para la ciudad, pues nos regala con oportunidades como esta de tener al Premio Nobel, de tener a Jean-Pierre en nuestra ciudad. Así que, primero que nada, darle la bienvenida a Jean-Pierre a Alcoy, a esta ciudad universitaria, a esta ciudad del conocimiento. Felicitarle también por el nombramiento como el doctor honoris causa, que se me había ido, doctor honoris causa por la Universidad Politécnica de Valencia y sobre todo pues que hoy también tendrá la oportunidad de conocer un poco nuestra ciudad y conocer nuestra gastronomía, pues invitarle a que en más ocasiones pueda compartir con nosotros jornadas, experiencias y estoy seguro de que se llevará un gran recuerdo de nuestra ciudad. Muchísimas gracias.
Buenos días. Gracias, director. Gracias, alcalde. La Universidad Politécnica de Valencia, en el marco de su 50 aniversario, está celebrando semanas temáticas a lo largo del año. Esta semana corresponde a la Semana hacia la UPV del 2030, hacia la UPV del futuro. Nos acompaña hoy un gran científico que a lo largo de su carrera siempre ha mirado hacia el futuro. El profesor Jean-Pierre Sauvage es un químico francés especializado en química supramolecular y en química de coordinación, que ha desarrollado su labor investigadora en la Universidad de Estrasburgo. Sus investigaciones se centran en topología molecular, especialmente en arquitecturas moleculares mecánicamente entrelazadas, así como en el área de máquinas y motores moleculares. Por dar algunas cifras, cuenta con más de 500 publicaciones, ha impartido más de 600 conferencias y seminarios en reuniones internacionales, en universidades y centros de investigación industriales o gubernamentales. Según la Easy Web of Knowledge, Jean-Pierre Sauvage es un químico altamente citado, con cerca de 36.000 citas y un índice H de 94. El 5 de octubre de 2016 fue galardonado con el Premio Nobel de Química, junto con James Fraser Stoddart de la Universidad de Northwestern y Bernard Feringa de la Universidad de Groningen, por el diseño y la síntesis de máquinas moleculares. Estos investigadores desarrollaron moléculas con movimientos controlables, que pueden llevar a cabo tareas cuando se les proporciona energía. Además, como ya se ha dicho anteriormente, mañana el profesor Sauvage será investido doctor honoris causa por la Universitat Politécnica de Valencia. Como veis, el título de la charla que va a impartir hoy es Molecular Machines, From Biology to Chemistry. Disfrutemos de su charla. Gracias.
Let me also thank the campus, this campus in Alcoy. I had a very interesting discussion this morning and very nice visit. And in particular, let me thank the president of the, is it the School of Engineering or the Institute? Maybe you can help me. Campus. Okay, so I said campus. It was okay. Good. So now we'll talk science. And I hope you will not be scared if we start with a bit of chemistry. But the main purpose of my lecture is to introduce you to my field, or one of my fields, because we have been working in many fields, but the field which has been especially selected by the Nobel Committee for the award in 2016. So a little bit of chemistry. I know that not everybody is a great chemist in the audience, which is good. So there are many people from various fields. And we will just look at a couple of very simple molecules. So you know that molecules consist of assemblies of atoms, which are connected with one another with bonds. And I just took an example which is really remarkable, which is C60. C60 is also called fullerene, and this molecule was found by accident, completely accidentally, something like 25 years ago. And the people who were working in a field which was very remote from this molecule, they were trying to make molecules which they hoped would be similar to the molecules found in space, in interstellar space. And in space, there are many molecules. Some of them are simple, some others are more complex, and they were trying to prepare such molecules. But they didn't obtain them. They obtained something which is very special, which is C60. And this molecule consists of 60 carbon atoms disposed exactly as a soccer ball. So if you look carefully at a soccer ball, a classical soccer ball, not a fantasy soccer ball, you know, like what the young kids like to play with, but a classical soccer ball is like that, like this. So you have 60 points, 60 vertices, and so here you have 60 carbon atoms. And the reason why I talk about this molecule is just to show you that you can represent the molecule chemically using a chemical representation, and at the same time the width, the diameter of this small sphere is 1 nanometer. I'm not sure everybody is familiar with the nanometer. Everybody knows the nanometer is very small, smaller, very small. But how small is it? And this is the reason why I took this example. The nanometer is to the meter, so the ratio between 1 nanometer and 1 meter is exactly the same between the ratio between a small bar of, let's say, 30 centimeters and the distance between the Earth and the Moon. It's a big ratio, isn't it? So it means that this small bar is very small compared to the distance between the Earth and the Moon, and the same is true for the nanometer compared to the meter. Now, just another example of a molecule. The molecule we have seen before is very simple, but you should know that chemists are not scared of tackling very difficult problems. And in particular, in the US, at Scripps in California, there was a team led by Casey Nicolaou, an American professor originating from Greece, actually. And he worked with many, many co-workers trying to make such a molecule. So before we discuss how they proceeded, let's look at the symbolism, the way these molecules are represented. You see here, you have an octagon. And an octagon has 8 edges and 8 vertices. And this vertex, and this other vertex, and this other vertex represents CH2. So we do not draw the carbon atom anymore. We do not indicate this is a carbon atom. It's implicit. When you see something like this, with vertices and edges, this means a carbon atom. And the chemists could make such a molecule, which is a natural substance, very, very complex natural substance. But it was an incredible challenge, and they succeeded. They could make it. They made it in 80 individual chemical steps, which means you start from a molecule, a simple molecule A, which is the very beginning. Then you will convert it to a second molecule, B, and it will take time, and you will have to optimize the conditions, find all the tricks to purify B. Then you will go from B to C, etc. And you do it 80 times. And it took them 12 years, so this is what they talk about, a 12 years odyssey toward the synthesis of brevetoxin A for a group of 25 people, which means 12 times 25, 300 years. So they have been working for 3 centuries, fortunately as a team, because for one person it would be difficult, and they succeeded. And that was considered a fantastic piece of work. Now, let's get closer to molecular machines and molecular motors. And there is a statement here which is very important. Synthetic molecules have always been regarded as static objects. So they can move a little bit, they can distort, they can vibrate, but we have no control over the motions. And this is why everybody would agree that synthetic molecules are still motionless. They just undergo random motion. Now let's look at biology. It is totally different. In biology, controlled molecular motions are absolutely essential and universal, omnipresent. We will see just a couple of examples, but we have rotary motors, linear motors. We will even see an example of a family of molecules in biology which walk. They walk on rails. Systems undergoing contraction, extension, and all these molecules belong to the big family of motor proteins. And motor proteins are everywhere. Just 2 examples before we move on to chemistry. I will take the first example, which is ATP synthase. And maybe you heard of ATP, maybe not, it's not essential, but ATP, it's a relatively complicated molecule. This is the fuel of life. When you need energy, you burn ATP. Well, you do not burn it like burning a fuel, but you degrade it, to a degraded form of ATP, which is ADP, plus phosphate. And when you burn it, you generate energy. But biology is very concerned about environmental problems, and the degradation products are recycled by the body, by the living organism. So the ADP and inorganic phosphate, the two degradation products of ATP, are converted back to ATP. And of course, you consume energy, which is mostly afforded by feeding your body, feeding the organism. And the enzyme which is responsible for that is a rotary motor. It is called Atp Synthase for making ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. It's not a very minor enzyme. It's an extremely important enzyme. Everything which is living on Earth is based on ATP synthase, from the most primitive bacteria to mammals, to human beings, of course. And another point is that every day in your body, you convert ADP and inorganic phosphate to regenerate your ATP, and then you will consume ATP, and you consume about 1/2 of your weight of ATP. Personally, I consume maybe 38 kilos of ATP every day. Can you imagine that? Kilos and kilos and kilos, but you recycle. So very environmentally friendly process. And there is a video, there are several videos, but I show you a video which is really spectacular, I believe, on the internet. It is ATP synthase in action. So ATP synthase is on a membrane here, and on this membrane you will have a proton gradient, but ATP is made by spinning this part, so it's a rotary motor. So when this part rotates, ADP and inorganic phosphate in yellow and blue arrive, and they are converted to ATP, this purple species. And this is not science fiction, it's based on very, very precise scientific data. It spins very fast, it's more or less like a Formula One, 10,000 turns per minute, and everybody, for the moment, has billions and billions of ATP synthase enzymes in action, so everybody is moving internally. Don't be scared, you do not realize. Another example, which I think is also very spectacular, is that of kinesin working on a microtubule. Again, it's one of the dream enzymes which is extremely attractive. So in the cell, you have factories where the molecules are made, and then these molecules have to be transported from the factory to where they are needed. It's exactly like a factory of, vacuum cleaners. And so those vacuum cleaners have to be transported, go to the stores, and finally go to the clients. And you need a transportation system. Big lorries, for vacuum cleaners. But here you have exactly the same. And the kinesin is this very tiny little thing. And it's working on a microtubule which exists in the cell, a very, very long rail. And at the back of the kinesin, you have this huge bag, enormous bag, full of molecules. There are proteins very often. There are also smaller molecules. And these molecules are transported or carried from one spot in the cell to another spot in the cell. Again, this is not science fiction. Our biologist friends know everything on the kinesin enzyme. So that's another example of incredible molecular machine, a walker. Now let's switch completely and talk about chemistry. We will talk about exotic species, or species, molecules, which were considered as exotic before we started in this field. So this is what the people used to call a catenane. A catenane, so the word comes from Latin, catena, which means chain. In Italian, it's also catena. I'm not sure in Spanish. So also very similar. Yeah. We are speaking Latin languages. And so this molecule appeared as almost impossible to make, such species. And for decades and decades and decades, nobody could make these molecules, and nobody could make them in a satisfactory fashion. So there is another type of molecules, rotaxanes, which are somewhat similar. Here you have a ring which has been threaded by an axis, and we attach two big stoppers here, two big groups to prevent the system from unthreading. And so why are these catenanes and rotaxanes so promising in relation to molecular machines? It's very clear. If you can make a rotaxane of this type, and if in addition you can trigger a motion, move the red ring from the left part of the axis to the right part of the axis, and go back to the original position, you are making a linear motor. It's really a linear motor, exactly like a piston moving in a cylinder. If you can here spin a ring around the axis, which is here, and the same here, if you can spin the ring or at least force it to oscillate between two positions, you are on your way to making a rotary motors. So we have here all the elements, linear motors, rotary motors, and then later on in the future, you will assemble those species for making really complex molecular machines and complex molecular motors. So how did we start in the field? And I think for young people, who might be in the audience and who are interested in their future, in science, in perhaps someday doing research, it could be an interesting example. When we started in this field, we were very interested in another field which was related to water splitting. Water splitting means the following. You take water, you mix with various molecular species, powders, whatever, and then you will be able to harvest light energy, better solar energy, and this energy will be used for splitting H2O to H2 and 1/2 O2. It's a dream reaction, and many people have dreamt of such a reaction, and we were also dreaming of this reaction many years ago. It's a very difficult project, but we embarked in this field. And at the time, there was a hero. The hero was this molecule. So it's not a very complicated molecule. I know that many of you are not so much chemistry oriented, but you have two such fragments. You have three such fragments, 1, 2, 3, and nitrogen atoms like to interact with a metal. And in this particular case, the metal is ruthenium. So it was very promising. There was a lot of work done with this molecule, and it is still going on. But there is a problem. ruthenium is a noble metal. Noble metal like platinum, gold, rhodium. Noble means very, very expensive and very rare. And so we thought ruthenium is nice. The molecule here is very exciting, but it's too expensive if one day we want to split the water molecule and have, let's say, big systems, factories for splitting the water molecule. Ruthenium will not be used. No way. Too rare. And we embarked in a project in collaboration with an American friend, a physicist or a photophysicist, David Macmillan. And David Macmillan, at the time we started, was on sabbatical leave in Strasbourg, and we had a lot of interaction. And so we had just made this compound here. It's a very simple compound with 2 nitrogen atoms. And these 2 nitrogen atoms will like to interact with a metal, such as copper. And so what we did together was to take this molecule, to mix with copper, and immediately, within a few seconds, we could obtain this new compound which contains 2 such molecules and 1 atom of copper at the center. So you see this molecule, you take 2 of those, so one will be lying in a horizontal plane and the other in a vertical plane. So now let's look at this molecule. At the time, we were drawing the molecule. There were basically, computers were not so popular as they are now, and we had no software to draw the molecule. So personally, I was drawing the molecules, and a great synthetic chemist of our team were making the molecules. And if you draw a molecule, I think you digest its shape much better than if you use the software, like ChemDraw. And now, having drawn this molecule, we thought, well, if we can connect this point to that point, we make a ring in a vertical plane. And separately, if we can link this point to this other point, we can make a ring in a horizontal plane. I'm sure it's clear to all of you. And what is so special about these links? They are interlocking. You form a catenane. And so this is the trick. You know, when we saw that, we thought, well, we have a nice trick to make catenanes. And catenanes are basically unknown. So what should we do? Continue in the field of solar energy, or jump into a new field which was completely virgin, and we decided to jump. And at the same time, a very good friend of mine, who was a great synthetic chemist, organic chemist, decided to join my group, Christian Dietrich Büchecker, and together we embarked in this new project trying to make a catenane with copper containing molecules. And you know, very often the people believe that when you start a project, a new project, it will take years and years and years before you get your first results. Not at all. After 10 months, we had our first publication. And this is the publication. It's in French. We did it on purpose, you know, just to make it clear that English is the dominant language in science, but maybe from time to time one can use another language. And so we published that, and it worked really like a charm. So now I will give up with my old drawings because after the prize, I gave lots of lectures in various places, and once in Grenoble, in France, and one of my former students, Damien Jouvenot, came to me after the lecture and he said, you shouldn't use those very dusty drawings, they are completely, they are perhaps historical, but they are ugly, nobody likes those old drawings. I will make some kind of animation for you. And now I show you the animation, which now replaces my old drawing. So we'll start from this compound, which is that. And we will mix with copper. So you form the N-twine species, and then you will cyclize on the right, on the left, and you have your catenane. So do you like this animation better? It makes it very clear, And the second strategy is slightly different. We start from a ring which has already been made before. It's a three-step synthesis, not very complicated. We add copper, and then we add the second fragment, which will thread in, and finally we'll cyclize. So copper arrived, the second organic fragment, and finally we cyclize. And this is even more efficient than the one-step procedure. So that was the beginning of catenanes. So all of a sudden, catenanes appeared as very accessible species, and within a couple of years, we could demonstrate that you can make grams of catenanes, you can make much more complicated catenanes, multi-catenanes, and so that was, of course, attractive to the chemistry community. So we could also have kind of 3D pictures. So this is this compound with copper in green at the center, a blue ring and a gray ring. And if you remove the copper center, you generate a totally new species with a completely different shape compared to the original shape. And this is shown here. The two rings can glide almost freely within one another. And so the two molecules are totally different, geometrically speaking. This is why we call this process a metamorphosis, a complete metamorphosis. And that was the beginning. For 6 years, we had no competitors. We were completely alone to work in the field of catenanes. And my students were very happy of that. Students are scared of competition. So they like to be, the only ones in the world to work on catenanes. I was much less happy. Because if you are alone, if you are the only group working in a given field, it may mean that it's not a very exciting field. And we were very happy after 6 years to see some other people, Fraser Stoddart, my very good friend, who entered the field, and gradually more and more people. And I think nowadays there are probably hundreds of laboratories working in the field of catenanes and rotaxanes. Just to show you that catenanes and rotaxanes are everywhere. You could believe that these species are very exotic species, but in biology, they are everywhere. DNA forms catenanes and knots all the time. Proteins also form knots and catenanes. 1% of the proteins are knotted or catenated. 1%. It's not huge, but it's very significant. And even viruses can form catenanes. So here, another example, it's a more complex catenane with DNA and a virus. Now let me move on and talk about the very first molecular machine we made in Strasbourg in 1994. And I think this is the most chemical slide which I'm going to use. I apologize. but I'm sure you will understand. Copper is a metal. Everybody knows copper. There are ions, which means that copper can be converted to an ion. An ion means copper with a positive charge. You can have either copper with one positive charge or copper with two positive charges. And copper ions, copper 1 plus or copper 2 plus, like to interact with nitrogen atoms. So they will look around here and see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nitrogen atoms. And depending whether it is copper 1 plus or copper 2 plus, the system will be happy, meaning stable, or not too stable. What we have to keep in mind is that copper 1 plus likes to be surrounded by 4 nitrogen atoms disposed in a tetrahedron as the vertices of a tetrahedron. Copper 2 plus now likes to be surrounded by 5 nitrogen atoms. So they are very, very different. Now let's start here. So we made a molecule of this type with a tetrahedral arrangement of nitrogen atoms around copper 1. Copper 1 is very happy. So the molecule is extremely stable. Now we will convert copper 1 to copper 2, copper 2 plus. So we abstract an electron and we generate copper 2 plus with still the same surrounding 4 nitrogen atoms. But in this case, copper 2 plus is extremely destabilized, extremely unhappy, and the situation has to be modified. So what will happen is quite simple. The ring will glide, and the fragment which was here originally doing nothing will replace this fragment with its 2 nitrogen atoms so as to provide the copper 2 plus, with a very satisfactory surrounding. 2 nitrogen atoms here and 3 nitrogen atoms here. So overall, we have 5 nitrogen atoms around the copper 2 center, and it makes this complex very, very stable. We can go back, we reduce the system, in other words, we inject an electron in the copper 2 center, and we regenerate copper 1. Copper 1 plus wants to be surrounded by 4 nitrogen atoms only, and so this situation is very unstable for copper 1. The system will again rearrange, it will rotate here, and regenerate the original form of the system. Is it clear? Yeah, thank you. So let's look at a video which was made by a former student of mine, Sylvester Bonnet, who is now an associate professor in Leiden in the Netherlands. And so it's a video, it's more spectacular. So we will have copper 1 and copper 2. Copper 1 is brownish, this is the real color, and copper 2 is kind of green. So we start from copper 1 with 4 nitrogen atoms. So very happy copper 1. Now we abstract an electron. We generate copper 2. Very unstable, the system rearranges, and now we have a 5 nitrogen atom copper 2, very stable. We can go back, we inject an electron again, and the system will spin, copper 1, very happy, we abstract an electron, etc. So we can do it as many times in the computer, but the beauty of the system is that we can also do it as many times as we like with the molecules. We have never seen any fatigue, any degradation. The system is perfectly stable. So that was the beginning. And then we became more ambitious, so we wanted to make systems which move faster, which maybe have a function, and we spent years and years trying to improve the original system. And between 1994 and maybe 2007 or so, we improved the system, and we used the rotaxane, for which we can spin the ring here around the axis, and we are now in the microsecond to millisecond time scale compared to the very beginning where it was between seconds and minutes. So it's a very significant improvement, maybe 10 to the 5 or 10 to the 6 improvement. So just to show you that if you are patient, if you are determined, you can really improve the systems you've made originally. Now, let me show you a real rotary motor, because the system we've seen is not a real rotary motor. It's kind of a pirouetting motor. It can rotate in one direction, but it can go back in the opposite direction. And so it's very important to have a real rotary motor with a fully controlled directionality. And the very first group able to propose such a system is that of Ben Feringa in Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. And in 1999, so 20 years ago, so they published a historical paper on the very first light-driven rotary motor. So we will not enter the details of the chemical system, but we have here carbon atoms, a carbon here, and there are two bonds between these two carbon atoms, what we call a double bond. And when you shine light on a double bond of this type, the double bond wants to move. It's very unhappy after having absorbed the light, and it wants to move. So this system will move. You go from here to here. The system will rotate like that. Now, if you heat a bit, the motion will go up. So this part will go below here, and you will obtain the third form. Now, if you shine light again, it will rotate like that, and you obtain the fourth form. And by heating for maybe 2 hours at 60 degrees, you will regenerate the starting form of the molecule. So that was, of course, not very efficient. It was taking maybe 3-4 hours for performing one turn, but it was very, very important in terms of concept. And Ben Feringa and his group, they published a nice video on the web, and I have stolen it, actually, but with their permission. And so this is the very nice video. So you have 4 steps. A photonic step first, and then you heat. It's a thermal step, which will be symbolized by that, like a radiator. The third step will be again photonic. You shine light. And the fourth step will be thermal. So let's start. You will see big flashes from time to time. A big flash here, you heat. Another big flash, you heat. Second big flash, etc. So each time you have 4 steps. And what I can do is just hope that you can visualize the motion. Can you? You know, some people can visualize it, some others, maybe if they spend an hour here, you know, they will not see it. So I'm very sorry, I cannot help you. Cello, do you visualize it? Yes, I'm sure. You're not a good person, you know, to test. So some other people in the US published another molecular machine, a very primitive molecular machine, which is a molecular shuttle. A molecular shuttle is just doing that. You have a ring, you have 2 stations, a green station and a red station, and the system can be moved from the green to the red station. And this system was published simultaneously to our catenane, pirouetting or oscillating catenane. We will not discuss it at all, but I think you have to know that it had very important implications related to the field which can be called molecular computing. So using molecules for storing information, for processing information, and so they did some very important work. They made an electronic memory device based on molecules with a huge density of information storage, 10 to the 11th bits of information per square centimeter. And when it was published, and I think it is still, it was the record, much better than memory storage devices based on transistors, on silicon, the ones we are using in our smartphones or computers. And everybody was very excited, but still, I think the system has to be improved. And now, let me almost finish up by talking about an artificial muscle. And this work, we had a lot of pleasure to do it, and also it had a lot of impact on many groups in the world working in the field of molecular machines. Just to remind you, a muscle contracts or extends using principles which are very different from a spring. A metal spring, a steel spring, you contract it or you expand it, but you introduce some strain in the metal. For a muscle, it is totally different. You have filaments which are gliding along one another, the thin filaments in red, the thick filaments in blue, and if you contract, you have to consume ATP because you need energy for contracting, and the thin filaments will move towards the center of this unit, which is a very tiny part of the muscle, which is called the sarcomere, which is an elemental unit of the muscle. So you contract here by consuming energy, and of course, when you stop consuming energy, the system will relax and you will go back to the expanded or relaxed form. It's a very complex system, and I'm very sorry that we have no time to discuss all the chemical elements and all the chemistry principles. The work was done by Professor Jiménez Molero and Christian Dietrich Büchecker, so they worked together for 2 years. It was an incredible pair of scientists working together, incredibly enthusiastic and efficient. And I just show you the neat result, which is that starting with such a structure, which is about 8 nanometers long, you have a deep blue, a dark blue ring threaded by a pale blue filament. The pale blue filament is attached to a pale blue ring, which itself is threaded by a dark blue filament, and we have here spheres, big spheres. So why do we have big spheres here? Why that? You can guess. It is just to prevent the system from dissociating. If you have no stopper, we call that a stopper, the system could dissociate. And so if you have stoppers, big groups here, the system will never dissociate. And we could show that by sending a chemical signal to the molecule, it could contract down to 6 nanometers, and by sending another signal to the molecule, it could expand again. And this piece of work inspires many groups, in a way. And nowadays, there are beautiful materials, like fibers, or small fibers, longer fibers, which are based on related principles. And those fibers can contract or elongate using, let's say, pH change or other systems, other ways of talking to the molecule. I think I will skip this part. I don't know how much time I still have. Probably not much.
50 minutes?
Oh, that's too much. No, everybody will be tired. Okay, well, I'll show you the last system then. Or maybe I will skip it. Are you interested in seeing a couple of pictures on the Nobel ceremony in Stockholm? Maybe no, maybe yes. Yeah. Okay, so let me just conclude by saying that before molecular machines, synthetic molecules were considered as motionless objects, and this is something I have already said at the beginning of my lecture. And so molecular systems undergoing large amplitude motions in a controlled way were very, very scarce. And this is why this field of molecular machines emerged and was considered as an important field. You may ask yourself, and you may ask me too, in which field of application will this area of molecular machines be the most important in the future? It's very difficult to say today, but one can maybe refer to molecular computing, electronic memory devices, and that's what I spoke about briefly. There are many other fields which are already, very, very close to applications. Chemical applications like sorting and transporting molecules, nano and micro robots, because I believe personally that robots will be in our everyday life in the future, and they will do things we cannot imagine today. They will maybe clean the table, clean whatever is around us. They will operate for us. They will transport things. And there will be micro robots and macroscopic robots. Probably one of the most important fields will also be delivering drugs, delivering important drugs, important molecules in the body, in our body, close to the target. So it's a field which is called targeting, so transporting and targeting. And there are already systems like that trying to find, let's say, malignant cells or viruses or bacteria in our body, and having a machine delivering the drug, maybe opening a container and delivering the drug very, very close to the malignant cell. And recently there was some beautiful work by the group of James Tour. The people have used Ben Feringer's rotary motor, and what they did was incredible. They took a cell, and they had this machine which they could bring close to the cell, and then they started to shine light, and they drilled, exactly like a drill. They drilled the wall of the cell, and they drilled the hole. So they made a hole in the cell to inject something. And so this is also a very exciting piece of work. We have to keep in mind that basic science is at the origin of everything, all the important technologies we know, and basic science has to be protected, and everything will come out someday. To know when, it's impossible to predict. Just to tell you, we all have computers, cell phones, and all that. They are all based on transistors. Transistors were more or less discovered in the 30s, 40s, 1930, 1940. And the research on transistor was based on semiconductors. if you have no semiconductors, you have no transistors. And the research on semiconductors started at the beginning of the 19th century. 19th century. So at the beginning, there were physicists interested in the electronic properties of semiconductors. That was almost 2 centuries ago. And they could certainly not figure out that one day, we would have computers based on semiconductors and transistors. So let me also thank all the people who've done the work. We have been, many people. And I was fortunate enough to work with incredibly efficient and talented scientists. The good thing of the French system is that we can work as teams of permanent people, plus PhD students and postdoctoral researchers. And so in average, we were 5 or 6 permanent people working together, good friends who were used to work together, some of them for 20 years, even more, 30 years. And so these people had a very important contribution. So in the field of catenanes and rhotaxanes, I'm very sorry, this is in French. I'm sure you have no difficulty to understand. So there were many PhD students and postdocs, and in the field of molecules in motion, so molecular machines, molecular motors. So these people have been also contributing in a very, very important way. At the very beginning of the molecular machine field was initiated by Aude Liveray in 1994, as I said. And then some important landmarks. Cello made the first molecular muscle. But I should say that we had a very nice Spanish connection. And it's not a slide which I prepared for this talk. It's a slide I use each time I give a lecture. So Diego Cardenas, who is now in Madrid. Pablo Gavinia is somewhere, yes. He's at the other university in Valencia. Who else? I'm sure there are some other. Felipe Reviriego. I didn't talk about his work because this is one of the most recent pieces of work. But honestly, the few Spanish postdocs we were happy to have in our group were incredibly efficient. So I didn't talk about this piece of work. We can skip it. And let me thank my university, the French CNRS, the new institute which I joined, ISIS, after the CNRS suggested me to retire. And when they suggested me to retire, I must say I was not especially happy. But I moved to this institute and I got an offer from Northwestern University in the US near Chicago, and I was very happy to accept it. So I spent 3 years commuting between Strasbourg and Chicago, mostly associated with Fraser Stoddart, my good friend and the second Nobel laureate. Again, this is in French, sorry. My mentor and good friend, Jean-Marie Lane. I learned transition metal chemistry with Malcolm Green in Oxford, and 2 teachers, my wife and my son. They were very forgiving to me when I was working, leading a group, and my 2 friends, Fraser Stoddart and Ben Feringer. Would you like to take 2 minutes for pictures? Yes? Okay. So now I tell you, we move to Stockholm, and we are December 10. And the ceremony, for delivering the Nobel Prize is every year taking place on December 10, except when it's a Sunday. It's a very formal event. Everybody is petrified. I mean, all the laureates are petrified. And especially in the morning, we have to rehearse. We are together. We meet together, and there is a master of ceremony showing us what we should do. Now you do 3 steps, and now you go 3 steps backward. You lean down, and you are completely lost. At the end of the morning, you don't really know what you will have to do, and so it's very, very difficult. Very formal. But anyway, when we were sitting all together on the stage, it's a huge room. There is the spokesman here, and the spokesman for chemistry. So you have the committee here, some members of the committees, here again, I recognize some of them. And this man, Professor Ramström, he calls the laureates. And as I said, you are pretty nervous. And after the ceremony, you feel better. You meet on the stage, and here I'm with my friend Fraser Stoddart. We know each other since 1979. 40 years ago we met, and we became friends from the beginning. So we've never been really competing with each other. We were communicating, knowing that the other group is doing this, we are doing that, don't get too close to us, but things like that. And Ben Feringa, I only know him since 1988, when I visited Groningen. So we are happy, clearly. And Jean-Marie Lane, for whom we have, the 3 of us, a lot of respect. I think Jean-Marie Lane is probably one of the most respected chemists in the world, in my opinion. I mean, he's really the father of several research topics, and of course he was invited to participate, and he came up on the stage with us. He knows the 3 others pretty well. And also on the stage with my family, my wife and our son and his wife, Jean-Marie. And here is a lady, Anneli, and I have to explain her function. So when you fly from Strasbourg, we flew from Strasbourg to Stockholm, so the Nobel Foundation sends you 2 tickets, 2 business class tickets to fly to Stockholm. And in the plane, you are sitting in the first row, and you are treated in a very special way. Then they open the door, and immediately you meet 2 persons. Anneli, this lady, and a man, with a costume and a cap, who will be your driver, because you will have a big Volvo limo, a big limousine, with the driver, with the chauffeur. A very nice person. And Anneli, she was the attaché. You have a schedule which is incredible. You spend 10 days in Stockholm, but you have no time to breathe, to rest. I mean, you have an appointment after another appointment, an interview, a lecture in a high school, all the time. And basically for you, it's impossible to remember, what you have to do. But she does. And she is with you, all the time, and she tells you, so now, Jean-Pierre, we have to go to this high school, and now we have a meeting with the press, all the time. And so we became friends, and she also became friend with my wife. So she was very, very pleasant. And the day after, this is now December 11, the day after we have some kind of small dinner at the Royal Palace. So the royal family invites you to have dinner at the Royal Palace. It's a kind of more intimate dinner, because the day before we were 1,300 people. You know, it's a big thing. 1,300 people at the dinner. And the day after at the Royal Palace, we were only 160. So that was fine. And I was sitting between the Queen and the Royal Princess. I was amazed, actually, very impressed. So we are here, a bit stiff, of course. You have the King here, the King of Sweden, the Queen of Sweden, and then 3 princesses and their husbands. And all these people are very, very pleasant to interact with. You can chat very freely. They know many things on basically every topic. They must be kind of instructed, to be able to have a pleasant conversation with many various types of people. So that was the day after. Just to show you maybe that Fraser Stoddart was not always dressed as a penguin, but he's a Scot. And 10 years ago in Japan, we were together at a meeting, and he decided to wear the kilt and the coat of arms, of his clan. He belongs to a clan. And that was also with my wife here. And in Stockholm, he was, if you're a good observer, you can notice that the kilt is not the same. That's it. And it's a very old picture. Believe it or not, but it's me here, maybe in 77 or so, and this is Jean-Marie Lane. So thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. So I tell you my personal viewpoint. When I was a PhD student, I think we used to spend a lot of time in the library. And it was before the internet, or at least before internet was everywhere. We had no online libraries. We had a physical library. And many of us, we used between 2 experiments to go to the library for 3 hours or so. I used to go to the library every Saturday morning from 8:30 to 12:30. And we were reading. And at the time, it was almost possible to read all the chemistry literature. We had probably 10 times less journals than nowadays, even more than 10 times. And so reading, reading on paper, browsing, turning pages of the journals was very, very helpful. Also because it could help you open up your mind. On the internet nowadays, you read what you want to read. There is no happy accident. You know exactly what you are going to read. You have keywords, and you do not find any interesting paper remote from your own field by accident. But at that time, you could be much wider and read a lot of everything, even find something completely by accident. You missed the right page of JAX or whatever, and you found something, nice, a nice drawing, so you were reading the introduction. And I believe, the most important is to acquire a very solid culture, a very solid background, preferably in various fields. Perhaps not too much in depth, but to have some ideas of several fields. And it was more the case for my generation than it is today, for your generation. I think everybody gets more specialized, which is nice. I mean, it's not a criticism. But being more specialized means perhaps being less open, to very wide field or several fields. Yeah, okay. So I believe the question was related to the nature of the signal, you send to the motor or the machine. And it started with electrochemistry, as you said. But nowadays there are various types. Photonic signals are very important, and chemical signals. A pH change or a chemical reaction. In biology, the signal is mostly chemical because you hydrolyze ATP to ADP, an inorganic phosphate, so it's chemical. And so from the beginning, where it was purely electrochemical, I think the scope has been much widened. Now, delivering a drug, let's say close to a cancer cell, there is research, very active research on that. But I should say that for the moment, molecular machines are not the only possible species which can be used. And several groups also focused on nanoparticles, mesoporous silica nanoparticles. And in these nanoparticles, you can entrap drugs, molecules, cytotoxic molecules. And the people are using that more than molecular machines for the moment. But of course, molecular machines for the future will certainly play a very important role.